At the beginning of the film we meet Mark, a Korean man who dedicated his whole life to arm wrestling, but currently works as security at a nightclub in the United States. One night, Mark is approached by Jin, an old friend he met while competing, and tells him that there is an important arm wrestling championship at the club, and they are betting big money. Mark wants to put that past behind him, but after much prodding, Jin manages to convince him to participate and win some extra money. They go to the other side of the club, where the competition was taking place, and see dozens of people betting on the wrestlers. When it's his turn, Mark has to face a strong fighter who has been beating all his opponents. In the place, no one knows Mark's past, so they don't think he can beat the star fighter and only Jin bets on him. The arm wrestling begins, and Mark proves that all his training as a professional arm wrestler is still intact. His opponent tries, but fails to budge Mark's hand even a millimeter, falling defeated as Mark begins to force himself, which results in Jin winning the bet and getting a bucket full of money. However, Mark's opponent refuses to accept defeat, and a big fight breaks out inside the club. Mark intervenes to defend his friend, but as a result of the fight he ends up getting fired from his job. A few days later, the man gets a quiet job as a guard in a supermarket, and although the salary is enough to live on, he misses his old life in Korea. Time passes, and one night he gets a call from Jin, saying that there is an important arm wrestling tournament in Seoul, and the winner will be able to compete in the biggest tournament at the international level. Mark looks at his old medals for a while, and finally makes the decision to travel to Seoul to compete again. When he arrives in Korea, Jin picks him up at the airport, and takes him to a restaurant where they talk about the tournament over lunch. Jin wants to be his assistant, and promises to get good sponsors to earn some money, but does not tell him that he also plans to gamble to become rich. After lunch, the boy takes him on a tour of Seoul, where several locals mistake him for a foreigner because of his accent and take pictures with him. At night they go to a disco, but instead of dancing, Mark stands in a corner all night, remembering his old job as a guard. Back at the hotel, Jin asks him if he ever thought about looking for his birth mother. It turns out that Mark had been given up for adoption as a child, but he replies that he doesn't really care much about that, as it's in the past. Jin then drops him off at a place for the night, which turns out to be a transient shelter, complete with a curious vibroacoustic waterbed. However, what caught his attention the most is a box that Jin left him, with a phone inside. When she turns it on, she finds an address, which turns out to be her biological mother's house. On the other hand, Jin goes to talk to a millionaire lender named Yu, and asks him to be Mark's sponsor in the event. At first, his men hang him by his feet for bothering Yu with such nonsense, but after watching a video of Mark, the band finally decides to sponsor him. However, they put a condition on him: Mark must win or lose as they command him. The next day, Mark follows the route on his phone and arrives at a peculiar house. Mark hesitates whether he should knock on the door, and as he is about to do so, two children approach the house. Upon seeing him, the girl says that his intimidating appearance scares her, so to avoid conflict Mark leaves, letting the children into the house. Inside, the siblings tell their mother, Soo Jin, about the huge, strange man standing in the doorway. Soo Jin quickly looks out the window, and sees Mark walking away. At the same time, we learn that Soo Jin owns a clothing store that is not doing very well. She owes a lot of money to loan shark Yu, and is always in trouble with him for not being able to pay. In the evening, Jin takes Mark to a kind of bar inside a shopping mall, where he introduces him to his new sponsor, pawnbroker Yu, who was eager to see the man's skill at arm wrestling. Here we are also introduced to a young man named Cheng, a superb millionaire who is Yu's partner and is in the business of making money from sports betting. After beating all his opponents, Mark proves his worth by beating a strong, trained army soldier, which pleases Yu, who pays for his stay at a 5-star hotel. Jin receives a message from Yu, indicating that Mark must win the first fight tomorrow, but lose the second. Jin is afraid that Mark will not accept the conditions, so he takes him to lunch and tells him about it, but to his surprise Mark accepts without problems. The next morning, Soo Jin prepares her children for school, when the boy, Jun Hyung, tells her about his concern about the intimidating man from earlier. His mother reassures him, and as they leave for school she pulls out some old photos, where we see a little Mark standing next to his mother. Outside, the boys cross paths with Mark again, and this time Jun Hyung threatens to call the police if he keeps bothering them. In the evening, Yu organizes a new competition, and summons the current Korean arm wrestling champion, a man named Combo. Yu wanted a professional like Combo to evaluate Mark's skills, to see if the boy really has talent. As he begins, Mark faces a 6-foot giant, whom he beats without much trouble, impressing the Korean champion himself. To Mark's surprise, Soo Jin was among the spectators at the event, and as the fight ends, Yu touches Soo Jin inappropriately, believing he has power over her because of all the money he owes her. Mark sees it all from afar and is furious, so when the second confrontation begins, the man beats his opponent quickly even though he should have lost, to protest against you. When you approaches him to claim that he did not fulfill the deal, Mark pushes him aside. Jin loses his mind trying to get you and Mark to get along so that the gang will continue to give them money, and as they are leaving he discovers that Soo Jin is the reason why Mark acted the way he did. Hearing this, Jin immediately goes to Soo Jin's store to ask her about her relationship with Mark, but at the same time Yu arrives at the place and starts beating Jin. Mark intervenes and starts fighting Yu's men, and seeing this Soo Jin approaches the pawnbroker to ask him to stop, but Yu pushes her aside. The situation escalates, but the police soon arrive and Mark and Jin are arrested. Mark needs his ID in order to be released, but he doesn't have his passport with him. The man explains that he came back to Korea to play in a tournament, and even challenges the strongest cop to an arm wrestling match, but they still won't let him go. Fortunately, Soo Jin arrives at the police station with Mark's passport, proving that he is Korean. At that moment, it is revealed that Soo Jin is Mark's half-sister, and also that her mother died over a year ago. Upon leaving, Soo Jin invites Mark to stay at her house for a few days, and over time the children eventually grow fond of him. One morning, Yu's men come to Soo Jin's house to threaten her and collect their debt. At the time, Mark was packing up his things to leave the house, not wanting to be a burden on the family. However, upon encountering Yu's men outside, Mark beats them up, and decides to return to Soo Jin's house to protect his family. Mark uses the time to go out to eat and play with the children, and they gradually become a close-knit family. It was very difficult for Soo Jin to take care of her business and the two children, but now that her brother is in the house, everything is easier. In fact, her house was a mess, with many clothes she sells in her store cluttered all over the place, but one day she returned home to find that Mark had tidied up everything. Meanwhile, Jin comes up with a new idea to make money, and calls a friend in a TV company to document Mark's life. Jin talks to Mark and tells him that his life is inspiring, managing to convince him to shoot a documentary to earn some more money. A few days later, Mark goes with his family to an arm wrestling competition, where the champion Combo was participating. When it is his turn, Mark takes on Combo, managing to beat him with some ease and surprising everyone. Some time later, the story of his tough past is made into a documentary, highlighting his adoption and his past as an arm wrestler. The documentary is televised, and soon becomes a big hit all over Korea, making them some money. One day, at the school entrance, the kids overhear a lady talking bad about Mark, but Jun-hee quickly says that her uncle is a champion, and upon hearing this Mark promises to win the tournament for her. One night, Mark returns home, and Jun-hyun calls him to show him some emails that his mother wrote to him almost every day. Upon reading them, Mark discovers that his mother had lifelong regrets about giving him up for adoption. It was not an easy decision, but the situation at the time was very hard and she could not even assure him a plate of food. Even when he was about to die she kept writing him emails, apologizing for abandoning him. In addition, Mark discovers that Soo Jin is not his half-sister. Her mother had adopted her when things were a little better. The next day, the family drives to the cemetery to visit his mother's grave. Mark was furious with Soo Jin for not telling him the truth, hiding from him that she is not really his stepsister, and very angry he decides to leave them and go back to the United States. Jin tries to stop him, reminding him that the tournament he came to Korea for is in a week, but Mark tells Jin that he feels he is just using him to make money. In the next scene, we see Combo training for the tournament. On the other hand, the mobster Yu hires a giant named Kane to participate in the competition. Kane used to be a ruthless arm wrestler, famous for cheating by injecting illegal substances, and injuring every opponent he faced. The day of the competition finally arrives, and all the spectators are very anxious for the event. The boys are left home alone, and they notice that Mark forgot to take his medal with him. With this excuse, the kids hop on a bus and head to the stadium to watch him compete. Minutes later, a friend of Soo Jin's calls her to let her know that her children are there, so she rushes out of work after them. The event begins and the three favorites, Kane, Combo, and Mark, are put into separate groups. They sweep the bouts in their respective groups, and make it to the semifinals with some ease. In the next fight, Kane destroys his opponent and makes it to the finals. Cheng, the young millionaire, bet all his money on the beast Kane, but seeing how well Mark is doing, he fears they could lose it all. Cheng tells Yu of his concern, and asks him to do everything in his power to make sure Kane wins the tournament. Yu then goes to talk to Jin, and offers him a payment of $200,000 to convince Mark to lose the semifinal against Combo. The young man accepts the money, and soon goes to talk to Mark, but his friend is not willing to lose. The money would help them pay off all their outstanding debts, and they could even invest the rest and make even more money, but Mark says it's worth more the promise he made to Jun-hee. The fight begins, and you can tell that Combo had trained a lot these past few days, but Mark still manages to win and make it to the finals. At halftime, Yu and his men capture Jin and start beating him, but Mark quickly arrives to help him, beating them up and saving his friend. Jin forgets about the money, and asks him to win whatever it takes. The final match begins, while thousands of people anxiously watch the fight. As usual, Kane plays dirty and commits a foul, twisting Jin's thumb and hurting him so that he loses strength. When the bout resumes, Kane looks like he can overpower Mark and brings his arm to his side, but just then, Mark sees the kids cheering him on from the stands. Remembering his promise and determined to win the match, Mark pulls out all his strength and pushes Kane's hand, managing to beat him and win the tournament. The crowd goes wild, and Mark takes the opportunity to speak to his mother in heaven, saying on open television that he loves and forgives her. The movie ends with Mark crying emotionally, while everyone celebrates his victory with joy. Subscribe and turn on notifications to see more videos like this. Leave a like to help the channel out, and thank you for watching.